Thanks everyone for tuning in to Youth Move Colorado's podcast. Today we have another Youth Move Colorado fellow here to talk about everything from self care to their own advocacy journey.
The material and information presented here is provided by Lived Experience Youth and for general information purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are of the guests of our podcast own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Youth Move.
This is Ella. Hello, Ella.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So, would you be okay with starting off talking about how you got involved with Youth Move Colorado, kind of what you do with our organization, how that's impacted your advocacy journey, and what advocacy looks like to you?
Yeah, so I believe I started with YMCO just as an attendee, either right before or during quarantine. Friend sent me the link that she sent to Facebook, was like, hey, you should check this out. And I was, working on getting more involved with advocacy work, becoming more self-aware in that sense. And I was like, oh, this seems, really cool. I didn't actually realize the grasp that Youth Move Co. had. I guess the influence that they had until I got into a meeting and there was over 50 people from across the state hopping on to this. And, in the past, you can sign up for clubs at school and you'll see people who are like, yeah, we're going to make change, we're going to make a difference. And it's just some people sitting in a classroom talking about ideas, but no one ever really commits. You're not seeing any effort. You just feel like you're running in a circle. And with Youth Move, it was incredibly empowering to be a part of this actually very powerful movement in a way that really sought to allow you to seek out their own leadership, to take initiative, to really have their voices heard because they were the ones directing it. And not only that, but when I first got on, they informed us that they were, for example, if there was a grant that was accepted by the state or approved by the state and directed toward, youth crisis housing, we would be the advisors for that. They were asking youth where did they want this money to go and actually taking what we said for more than greater thought. We are actually taking and implementing action, which for me was awesome and amazing and something you really don't see happening.
Awesome. Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about this work too. I wanted to start moving into kind of policy based social work once I finished school. So it's so great to be able to be in those spaces, use your voice, and use your lived experience to make youth voices heard. Thank you for sharing. So you also mentioned that you have a special focus on assisting transition aged youth as they kind of venture into the adult world. Could you tell me a little bit about where that focus comes from and kind of elaborate on what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting living in the generation that we do because a lot of, I would say it's a very common experience, especially for people with lived experience relating to mental health, that they feel like they grew up too fast. They feel like, especially when it comes to trauma, either cycles were stopped or ended, your access to inner child work was cut off, your access to sense of self, you felt like you had to be an adult to take care of yourself. And so one way or another, that transition is disrupted. So this idea of a healthy transition from, around the age of 18, 19, whatever works for you, transitioning from, being very dependent on your family, particularly in the United States, is a very Western idea of being very super independent and just going out on your own. You go from being hyper dependent to solely self-sustaining, all these things. I'm like, that's impossible right now. Not in our economy, not in our society, especially when we feel so disconnected and we're systematically taught to be disconnected from each other. And so with me, actually my major is focusing on social policy work too. For this reason is I was so tired of feeling like I was studying the system sucks, and never looking at how we're finding each other, how we're healing, how people are finding joy. And so for me, working with transitional youth and not even just feeling confident in how they're going about this, because no one knows how to do taxes or feel confident that you filled out your W-4s correctly, but also knowing that there's someone there who understands and can tell you on the other side of it that, yeah, it's scary, but you'll be okay, regardless of whether you have difficulties at home, regardless of if you have issues with mental health, because it can be very stigmatizing to say, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have this, and people don't realize how that completely changes your worldview when you go into the world every day and how that impacts like daily interactions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another thing that I love about our organization is like how we use peer support and we talk about the importance of that all the time. Like who better to support a young person in transition than another young person in transition because we are youths until we're 25. I'm still a youth, getting close, but absolutely. So, could you talk a little bit about self care and kind of how that fits into your work, what your favorite forms of self care are, what kind of your journey to recognize the importance of self care?
Yeah, so that has been a major theme for me for the past 6 months because I went from being the hyper focused student that was constantly waking up early, staying up late, doing all the activities, doing all the things. And then it's not that I burnt out per se, but I was starting to realize the toll it was taking on my body in the way that, as I figured out more about myself and I needed time to process those things and I had the space to do so, I was like, wow, what? And people would say, take care of yourself. And suddenly I was like, what does this mean? What does that look like? And something I've come across a lot as, because I'm a big fan of retail therapy. Big fan. I should not be as a young adult living in New York. I should not be. But
New York. I didn't know you were in New York.
I'm from Colorado and I still work most of my, if not all of my advocacy work is out in Colorado. But I've been living here for school.
Awesome.
Um, but again, it's incredibly expensive. And so something that really caught my attention was I was reading this one creator talk about community care as opposed to self care. And I was like, how does this work? And they're like, why is it that self care is what you're taught to do is 5 ACRONs, face masks, little treats for yourself, and to help yourself feel better, even if temporarily, like that's your special moment. I'm like, why is it not going to social dances, reaching out to a friend and going for coffee, making plans, doing these things? And yes, you should have your own alone time to be with yourself and learn to be with yourself. But also, there's such a beautiful source of healing almost and wellness that comes from looking for care and building community. And so that's something I really would like to focus on in my work is teaching people how to connect again because I think that is something we all struggle with. Self care for me is I think with ADHD I struggle with inconsistency. So adding degrees, like some things that I can rely on in my routine. So like making sure that my body is nourished. However that means is that having a snack tray of cheese sticks, fruits, veggies, and it may not look like a meal, but I'm getting all the things I need. Is it being active, movement, moving my body? Is that just stretching a little bit? Is that doing yoga? Is that going for a run? The words themselves are the elements you need to implement for you. So like for me, it's nourishment, movement, and rest and reflection. So what does rest look like? Does it actually look like it's laying down taking a nap? Because for me, it's being creative and processing all these things that I've consumed in my world and the things I'm learning in school and like letting my mind rest and just do this thing and build like color silly little pictures, whatever. For everyone that looks incredibly different because like I know for my roommate hers is going to kava bars, it's going out and seeing people. For my other roommate, it's playing video games and doing nothing all day. Murder mystery games, board games, just being interactive and doing something and stimulating her brain, but no socializing. And so it's different for everybody. You have to figure that out and figure out what helps you to feel fulfilled, but also acknowledge that we are taught not to reach out to people, to be independent. And I think that it's incredibly powerful to break away from that in a way and realize, okay, this is what connecting with my community feels like and can feel like.
I love that. I love that you mentioned that self care looks different for everybody and different things are going to work. Something I love is we all like recharge differently. So I consider myself an extrovert, but I recharge by being alone. For other people, like it sounds like you might recharge by being social. So I love that you mentioned that it's different for everybody. And I love this idea of community based care. Do you think that like forms of community service and going out and kind of advocating for positive change in your community, do you think that that could be self care for someone?
Definitely can be. I will say through my work here, I have gained so much just in terms of being really excited to connect with people who are in a similar place of being, like we're often doing the same things in our lives, even if we're in different places. It's interacting with someone who you can tell is just as passionate about this as you and just as driven to create change and just sharing those ideas for me, like that idea of creative dating almost, that is healing. And it validates my experience in a way. It's like coming from lived experience. Suddenly it's not just, dude, I have to figure out how to heal, how to process, how to be a good person. Because even if it wasn't my fault, now suddenly it's my responsibility. And taking that and turning it into something almost like a tool to empower other people to let them know that this is not an individual thing. In terms of, okay, this is a good example. There's a game that I love called We're Not Really Strangers. And you can play it with friends, strangers, whoever. And there's 3 levels. There's perception, reflection, connection. And as you keep asking the questions, you get deeper and deeper and deeper. But there's also like a transparent card that if someone answers a question vaguely, you can ask them to dig deeper. But that's just an example of playing that game. No matter what, you will find out that you have so much in common for the completely different human being. And embracing this idea that we are also very deeply interconnected and that humanity has an essence almost that we can all connect with is such, it's relieving because you're not alone, you're not isolated. You might not like believe, but you just like in your pain or in your like triumphs, you guys have something in common, which is just, it's magical and it's like exciting and awe-inspiring and you become speechless almost when you just grasp how like truly interconnected we are. So I would say yes, like short.
I love that so much. How do you think that the pandemic kind of, I mean, obviously it changed how we socialize. I hear a lot of talk about like how the pandemic negatively affected how we socialize. Do you find that kind of since then your appreciation for community and for the need to, have good social health, do you feel like that's had a positive change? I think it might have for me.
I can see where I'm coming from. I was fortunately in a very privileged position. I had family working in healthcare. I very quickly transitioned to online education. I was not working. I was not an essential worker at the time. And my friends and I became very creative in terms of how we went about that. So like I know for one, we would meet in the parking lot of my mom's job every Thursday and pick up coffee from the place. And then I'd leave the coffee next to her car and we would just sit like a good distance and just talk for a few hours and like with that separation. Or there's all kinds of examples. I think it's still like I'd say the repercussions of it and the fact that like at my school the teachers talk about all the time how the hallways used to be filled with people, filled with activities, filled with having things happening, and now they're struggling and constantly asking us, what can we do to bring you back here? What can we do to keep you from the virtual classes and have you here again? And I will say that there's nothing like in-person connections. There is something beautiful about being able to maintain a connection with someone virtually. But to me, the pandemic was very eye-opening in terms of realizing just how isolated we have become as people, like how did not really know how to organize and achieve goals as a collective because like you could see efforts, you could see that people were trying to do supply drives and set up these stones of care, and it just was not happening because we don't know. And so for me, if anything, it was more of an inspiration to take more of a hands-on approach to recognizing how community can be protected and encouraged. Because the first step to community is recognizing that you share space and how we, like for example, just a great example is on the subway. How many people had your same hair color? How many people were wearing the same kind of shoes? You had this incredibly niche mutual experience of having bought the shoes, having chosen to wear them on the same day, on the same time, in the same place as you. It was important. But the pandemic it was interesting because you had to learn. I'm just thinking about all the little kids who could not learn how to read facial expressions and like how crazy that was for teaching kids to socialize and how there's this whole joke about like pandemic babies. And I'm still not excited per se, but wondering how they're going to turn out. And it's like that degree of socialization is so necessary for us as people because we're social creatures. I feel like I'm not the best person to ask about that because I was in a position where, I could still see people and I wasn't fully at risk and I didn't have someone who's like autoimmune at home. But
And you have to get creative though,
yeah,
I think last question, if you could have like one piece of advice for someone who's maybe just getting into self-care, maybe doesn't know what they need, and who might not be totally comfortable with like going out and meeting people and the social side of things?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, Here, I'll ask you this. What was what's, when you think of self-care, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
For me, my cat is my self-care, totally like emotional support animal. Reading, that's for me, that's my form of self-care.
No, yeah, my cat is my child. I love her so much. I agree. Um, I would just say going off of that, think about, as someone with ADHD, I struggle with the hyperfixations. And so something I struggle with a lot is not having things that bring me comfort. Like I don't have a favorite show. I don't have a favorite tea or something that resembles comfort for me. It's always changing. And so really sitting with yourself and thinking about what could comfort me right now, like doing a quick body scan and recognizing where is this need that I'm feeling? Is it a texture? Is it a food? Is it a person? What is it that I need right now? And looking to not ignore it, but how can I embrace it almost? So if it's like your inner child, and you can look up signs of like inner child needing visibility, or you're feeling, like you're craving something more. Like, what does that mean to you? I don't know. I think the best piece of advice I have for people, regardless if you have anxiety or lived experience, is learning to ground, not meditation, not yoga, learning to ground and be physically in your body is the very first step, because learning to be present is something that's incredibly difficult right now. We're always planning for the future, but sitting with yourself, realizing where your emotions are sitting in your body, where you're physically at, and going from there, because even like just the first step to healing emotions in the first place is, where is it in your body? What is that telling you? And so that would be my advice, is looking up some simple grounding techniques, simple breathing techniques, and just learning to be in your body.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ella.
Yeah,
Do
thank
you have
you.
anything to add that we didn't chat about already? Or anything
Um,
that you wanna, I don't know.
I think that there has to be, there's this very, something that I've come across a lot is this very white centric idea of, and it's not like shame on that, but there's this very white centric idea of health and self care, which is like do yoga, do meditation, do the journaling. And that is not going to work for everybody. For some people, it could be cooking a dish that they grew up with in their home country and we don't have the ingredients for here, or finding a way to go about that. It could be social, like listening to music and dancing with people who, come from a similar cultural background. It can be anything, but people should learn to embrace this idea of cultural competency almost, because when you look at trauma informed peer support, I'm sure you know this, like with the social policy, you have to look at this idea of cultural and generational competency and realizing like what these experiences bring into their approach to self-care. And so I would say that's the last thing I'd tag on to that.
Yeah, great point. The idea of self-care and just mental health in general has absolutely become white centric and commercialized too. When we're talking about self-care, you said it already, the face mask and get a mani-pedi. It's not going to work for everybody. Yeah, great insight. Thank you. All
So
right.
are you also a youth move fellow?
No, I'm not. I'm in AmeriCorps Vista, serving with Youth Move Colorado.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, for like another 20 days, almost at the end of my service year. Thanks so much for joining us, Ella, and for chatting about self-care.
So, okay.